I think games are just not just a form of an escape, but like a provocative tool to help us process our own struggles that often act in like parallels to the struggles we face in games. Quite often they can mirror what's going on in our life. And I think we connect and relate with the narrative of a game, learn decision making skills, connect deeply with the art of characters, music, narrative, acting, all while playing a primary role in connecting them all together. Do you know? Hello and welcome back to Press Any Button to Continue. Today we have something different, as my name is Keith and I'm not joined by my co-host Nisha. If you've been following the podcast this season, I had to be away in Japan for a little while, and Nisha took up the mantle, did a great episode, had some listener questions, and we decided to balance out the equation, and now I'm doing a solo episode. So hello all my sassy cuties who are listening to this episode. Today I wanted to take the opportunity to do something a little different, as I think when you're working on your own, I guess you have an opportunity to really, jerk your own diddly fiddly, right? So today I wanted to take a look at, from my point of view, the idea of a therapist talking the importance of video games. So for those who don't know my background, I am a qualified therapist. I have always been in love with video games since I was 7 years old. And I found there's always been a correlation between, the games I'm playing, when I'm playing them, how I'm playing them, and my mental health. In terms of my own educational background, I did a master's in applied psychology and guidance and counselling, and then I expanded on that by doing a master's in art therapy. And I guess what this allowed me to do is, this episode isn't going to be, a thesis analytical style episode, but it is going to allow me to understand empathy and sympathy, human emotions, how they connect with video games. I want to talk specifically like video game as an art form. I want to talk about us as a player pushing the narrative forward, the bonds we create with them, the attachments we have with them. And I really want to express maybe to people who don't understand video games the importance of them. So the idea that I think as an art form, I believe personally they are, when they're at their best, higher than movies, higher than, even books sometimes, right? Because you're weaving all these different things together into one. So as background, I worked as a therapist. I had my own practice for a couple of years, but primarily not so much to be focused on that. I've gone through my own mental health journey. I've been a client of therapy for many years as well. And I feel like I've worked on myself to a point where I can understand my relationship to video games, what they meant to me, the importance they had. And I guess for a lot of people, potentially including myself during different times in my life, the life-saving quality they have, right? Because I think a lot of people have this idea from the surface looking in, if they don't understand video games, and I experienced this during my training as a therapist. I would talk about video games passionately and people would perceive them as, you're just throwing your head in the sand, you're trying to ignore the world or whatever. And my rebuttal to that would be, well, aren't you always doing that when you're watching TV? Like, isn't TV even a more less interactive form, a less involvement form? Now, I have no problem with, you need to throw your head in the sand from time to time, and you need distractions in life. They're so important. But, it's you can't say one without the other. So, a lot of people see video games as Fortnite and Minecraft. And Fortnite and Minecraft are great games. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, they're omnipresent. So I think a lot of people who don't understand video games just see video games as that. A Lego creative game and a shooter game, a childish-looking shooter game. And that's obviously not what I believe of those games, but that's quite a lot of the subjective views looking in. So I kind of wanted to talk and say my piece on, what I feel about them, how important they are to me. And hopefully if you're someone who's listening to this, which I know is probably unlikely, who doesn't understand video games or maybe doesn't understand the connection to them, or you think they're a waste of time, maybe hopefully this can be a conversation that will change your opinion on that. So the first thing I kind of wanted to look at when talking about video games is them as an art form, because I think for the longest time they were always looked at as a toy, and to some aspect that's true. Like, the idea of play is so important, and from a therapeutic point of view, and from a training point of view, we're always talking about, like, as adults we lose the idea of play. And video games seems to be one of those still safe havens, whereas adults were still allowed to play and for some reason, not feel weird about it. Like, when we're growing up, play is such an important part for our own mental development. You know what I mean? We have toys, we project onto them, we project our fantasies, we project our hopes, we project our wants, and, we communicate a lot with that. Specifically, my training is in being an art therapist, and the idea with that is we use art as a form, to help, make you more self-aware. It's not about being good about art. It's not about having a technical ability with art. It's about doing something. It's using your materials with your hands. And it does still have like a very talk therapy focused aspect to it as well. But what you're doing is when you're making images, you're using other parts of your brain. You're literally creating a bridge between your unconscious and your conscious. And because our unconscious thinks a lot in images and our conscious, works a lot verbally. So if we can create that bridge, what we're doing in turn through the idea of using something like art is we're allowing us to become more self-aware about our own triggers and our own things we need to learn about ourselves, so we can process them and we can get past them. And it does so in a very safe environment. The idea that I love about video games when you're bringing in that play and that creativity is that it's one of the only art forms I can think of off the top of my head, where as a spectator, right? So obviously if you're, your band, you're a musician, you're obviously actively creating. If you're an artist, you're actively doing it. But from the spectator point of view, that, a video game is actors, a video game is voice actors, it's art, it's artists, it's painters, it's musicians, it's orchestras, it's, technically minded geniuses, it's coders, which are all, art in of itself, and it's fusing them all together into this one medium that has to give a player autonomy to make their own moves within it. You and yourself have to push the narrative forward. Unless it's a story game, like a cinematic story game where you're just pressing choices. But even then, you're always pushing the narrative forward. So you as a spectator are actively taking part in the art that has been created. You're actively moving it. You're actively experiencing it. And, in that in turn, you're creating this very memorable experience, like if you like it and you're involved in the video game. When we watch a movie, they're great distractions to sit back in, but they're on rails. They're being shown to us. It's what we see in front of us and we absorb it as it is. But for a video game, if we get too scared at a part, or if we lose interest even, the positives or negatives, or if we can't put it down, obviously with movies and music, you can have the same thing and not putting it down. But, we constantly have to be pushing forward. We can get stuck in a video game. Do you know what I mean? Like we can be in part. You have to build up tenacity. You want to see the rest of the story. You're gonna have to figure out a way to get through it. For different difficulty spikes. And from my own point of view, obviously video games start off, you look at the NES, the SNES, very quickly, obviously as graphics evolved, so did the idea of kind of cinematic storytelling. Obviously you look at a game like Pong, it's two paddles hitting each other. And I think depending on generations, not always, but my experience of talking to people throughout different generations, a lot of people still see it from the toy point of view. But even when it was a toy, toys are so important. Toy is not a word that should be taken lightly. Like growing up, toys is how we communicate. Toys is how we make friends. Some of the friends I still have today, I met from playing video games, think in the early days of Pokemon. So you can't dismiss the importance of just even them as play. Even if you weren't considering play and toy as an art form, you still can't dismiss the importance of them full stop. Obviously there's extremes, I'm not saying that there aren't games that, have a serotonin addiction of opening up loot boxes or whatever that, aren't always healthy, but nothing is healthy in excess. Do you know what I mean? So, obviously with the caveat of saying that, there's nothing out there in excess that's good for you. Do you know what I mean? Even going to the gym too much is not good for you, do you know? And when you look at something like addictions, when they become that, that's all because you're filling a void in something. So I think it's important to distinguish people seeing video games as a distraction to ignore the world versus an addiction, because any addiction is trying to ignore, what's going on internally and externally. But we can actively enjoy books, films, games, very something that is very positive towards us, something that can actually give us self-esteem, something that can help us connect with others and interact with others. And even, when it comes to stories, and particularly video games, because again, it weaves all these different types of art forms together into this one very special package. Obviously, video games can be bad too, but you really think of cinematic masterpieces like, The Last of Us, which is turned into a TV show, which, a lot of people who don't play video games can now enjoy the narrative of that. But I would still argue that out of which two forms is the higher form to, I'm not saying that subjectively, at least, you know what I mean? Objectively, you can enjoy what you want. But, if you're playing the game and you're experiencing that story, that story takes place over, 20 hours. And what you're doing is you're making, you're the one who's pushing that forward. So when you have these interpersonal relationships between characters like Joel and Ellie, you're feeling them so much more. When you're in The Last of Us Part 2, the idea of the cycle of violence and the effect it has on people, it tackles these really intense, serious themes and makes you feel so uncomfortable, which is such an amazing thing that art can do, and particularly video games, is make you feel emotions in a safe space that you don't always get to feel. And they can be uncomfortable and they cannot feel nice, but that's incredible art. Art makes you feel things, that you can do in this kind of, framed environment that, you're not experiencing this fear, but you are experiencing, well, you are, but, you're not in active danger for certain things. Same way horror movies kind of do in a way, but just in a more involved sense with them. So I just think as an art form, and as an involvement, I can't think of many other art forms that require the spectator to participate in such a heavy way. And when they're creating these pieces of art in the form of video games, particularly today, obviously I know they were a bit more purely for the fun and a 20-minute distraction when they first came out. But today when you have these big cinematic games, that are telling the story that you're involved in, that you're emotionally attached to, there's nothing quite like it from that point of view. And I think how you as a person relate to these stories and how you relate to the character you're going to project onto the character you're controlling. Think about that for a minute in terms of exploring your own self, how you react to you controlling a character that you have certain control over. But in a very story-driven game, they also have these cutscenes where they're making these decisions that you agree with or you don't. And you agree or you don't agree with them so much more because you're an active participant in them. You're not just on that kind of rail path with it, So I think video games can be such an amazing discovery and route to yourself. They can be just fun too. I mean, I don't want to make it overly serious, but this is an opportunity for me to kind of speak my mind on why I'm so passionate about them and how they've related to me and my own mental health, my own training as a therapist. Because at the end of the day, working as an art therapist, video games are a form of art we consume as well. And I think they're very, very incredibly impactful and important. We live in an age and a day where video games now they make more money than movie and sports combined, but sometimes they can be still snobbed a little bit, So I think there's a huge important element of singing the praises of what these developers have done. And big games nowadays are taking 5 to 7 years. Look at a cinematic masterpiece again, like Red Dead Redemption 2. The story that tells, if you're someone who's listening to this and you have an opinion that you think, video games are a plaything that are for children, which is fine. That's okay to think. We all have opinions of what we feel things are until we get to know them. But if I could just make a recommendation, if it was something that, you had a curiosity that you want to see them differently, or you would like another art form to enjoy, if you're an avid reader, you're an avid movie watcher, maybe you're a creator yourself. If you enjoy painting, if you enjoy making music, I promise you'll be able to enjoy the art of video games, because you're placing yourself in this 3D environment with all those things that you love doing outside of a video game formulated into this one virtual space. Not to mention, obviously, the huge importance of, I think, during my teenage years and the first time that online gaming became a thing, we're talking about, taking the internal experience of playing a video game in a story-driven environment to this external experience of where you're talking to people from around the world. you're chatting. Obviously that can have a positive and negative effect, and I'm not saying for a second that, if you have kids growing up or whatever, that you don't need to be careful of who and how they're interacting and how much they're consuming. I'm not saying that. It's so important that that's monitored too. But for me, I remember from the ages of I remember hating school from the ages of I'd say 13 to 16. I just fucking really just wasn't enjoying it. I wasn't being I wouldn't say I was being actively bullied or anything like that. I was just an in-betweener, but I just didn't feel like I fit in. I was able to make my way through it. I was able to mask my way through it, you could say. I never felt I got to be myself, like the personality that I get to show today to people on stream or on the podcast or with Nisha. I never really felt I had the ability to be that person, and I eventually moved schools. Again, the moving schools thing wasn't there was a huge issue. It was just an unhappiness, There wasn't anyone bugging me. There wasn't anyone, being super mean to me or anything. It was just an unhappiness, and I felt I needed a change in my life. But how I got to that change was I was playing Xbox Live for the first time, which I have a big super nostalgic spot for the Xbox 360. And I remember playing Halo 2, Halo 3, Gears of War, and I made friends on that. I made friends on that I could be myself with. So what was happening is, all of a sudden, I go into this big ether, into the outer world, where I met this, I met a person I used to play with every day after school for a couple of hours. And I got to be exactly who I was authentically. And, we get a reflection of who we are through others. And that's why it's really important to surround yourself with, people who see you in a good light for who you are when you are, right? Obviously not to excuse bad behavior, but, that, when you are just being yourself and you're not doing any harm, that, people enjoy you for you. And I remember just laughing endlessly, just having the best time. His name was Christopher. He was from the UK, and we used to just play every day after school. We used to talk about how much we were dreading going back to school, would share in the miseries, would have a laugh, would be, playing multiplayer games together. That was it was building up teamwork. It was building up my conversation skills as well. Talking about an art form, but then talking about the social aspect of it, right? So, talking about these single player, art-driven masterpieces, and then they often have a multiplayer mode where then you're sharing the passion of what you love to. I can't express how important it is to have something you're passionate about and you enjoy. I'm very lucky that I get to work as a streamer. Now it's not like it's month to month, it's paycheck to paycheck. It's not a secure job. It's not a financial easy job by any means at all. It's a bit of a vocation, but I wake up every day motivated that I get to work in something I love as well, while also getting to work as a therapist on the side for a bit. But so I think that internal experiencing narratives and stories, and the external, the socializing aspect of it, I think is incredible. And that's not to get me wrong. Of course, I also think, getting out, exercising, meeting people in the real world too, just as important. I'm not saying that for a second. But take this version of me who from the ages of 13 to 16 felt like they were masking every day to be someone else, felt that they had, they weren't being authentically themselves, and then getting put into this environment where I was meeting these people through playing video games that allowed me to be me, that enjoyed me for being me, which gave me confidence to be me. And then eventually when I decided to move school, I went in on the first day nervous and scared, but I said, there's nothing worse, in my opinion, from my learning of that experience than pretending to be someone else and it not working out for you anyway. Do you know what I mean? So it's I was right, I've got this confidence from my love and passion of video games. I have other passions too, like music. I play guitar and piano and stuff like that as well. But then from also sharing that passion with others, getting into that online space, playing Gears of War with my friends, and then being okay, I feel comfortable in me enough that on the first day of this new school, when I was 17 years old, I'm going to be exactly who I am, whether people love it or hate it. And thankfully, people seem to enjoy my company. So, I think, and also I think, when you are authentically you and you are really passionate about something, it doesn't matter whether someone likes that subject or not. Just by the fact you're so animated and enthused by something, that's an infectious energy that I think draws people in the first place, do you know? And I just think from that point of view, my own mental health and the psychology behind video games as an art form, as a social tool, as a passion and a hobby, really culminated in that experience and have been to this day, to the point where they're so important to me that I love the good, the bad, the ugly. I love the stories behind them. I love how they're made. I love how they impact people's lives positively or negatively. It's just they're such a beautiful form of art. They're such a beautiful form of getting to understand yourself, to promote your own self-awareness, to get to meet people from around the world. I've visited people in different countries. Different people from around the world have visited me. You don't get that in many other hobbies. You really don't. It's always, there's plenty of hobbies you can have locally, but not often does that allow you a full access to a world of people that expands your horizons and gets you to understand different cultures and different tastes, gets you to be more empathetic as a human and understand different types of people better, that makes you more well suited for the world, because I remember even the idea of, I remember I was in an all boys school, and I remember thinking single sex schools are kind of weird, right? Because it's there's always the idea of, you kind of want to prepare yourself for a real world where, there's multiple sexes and there's multiple people from different backgrounds and identities. And I think from that point of view, there's that very interesting aspect of it that's just so important in an element of you want to be able to experience all walks of life of people, and for me, I felt I remember because I moved to a mixed school as well, and for people to understand, and there's always a big criteria too of making sure that boys growing up that they understand women, and they understand girls, and they understand there's always this kind of teach your boys to be better, teach your kids to be better, teach your girls to be better, teach if you have non-binary kids as well, anything in regards to that, obviously, to be better. But the more people we get to interact with, the more people we get to understand, and hobbies and passions that allow us to do that is just so incredibly important. So I think from my background, getting confidence in myself through the passion of that, getting to meet others, and then, you have a reflection of yourself through meeting others, and a positive view of yourself eventually, particularly if you have a negative view, just so important. I think as well, the idea of pushing the narrative forward, video games really, they can build up as I said earlier, a tenacity. They can build up a drive, they can build up a motivation, they can, you don't quit at the first sign of failure type of thing. And I think really there's been many games that have tested me, really, really tested me. And overcoming that is such a great feeling. And there's no doubt that some of, as crazy as it might sound, there's no doubt that some of the difficult elements in video games, keep at it. There's a keep at it attitude that I would have learned from that as well, that would have gone forward. So that's kind of my basic overarching view of myself, kind of my background, my relationship with video games from a very just, if you've listened to this previous episodes of podcast, myself and Nisha love to go into just having a good laugh, love talking about our nostalgic memories, and we do have some kind of serious chats as well. But, you can kind of get my history more of the different video games I loved and what they meant to me in other episodes of the podcast. But for this, I just kind of wanted to give more of an overarching avenue of the importance of it to me, and where I think the psychology or the mental health, or me as a therapist talking about the importance of video games to people who maybe don't understand them as much, and just how incredible they are for, even collecting them, right? People love collecting stamps or books or whatever. There's an interesting, I think, psychology behind collecting too that we might get into next. But I do think, before I move on to the collecting aspect, I think, if we think about childhood and adolescence and attachment, there's the idea that, when we grow up, we have an attachment, which is the idea, for us to feel safe and to kind of grow properly and accordingly, we need one good adult to be there for us. And unfortunately, we live in a world where that's not always true. I'm very lucky that I've had a very supportive family growing up. I've had a great family, but I know for a lot of people that's not always the case. And I know as a therapist, having seen a lot of clients of all different ages, commonly that's not the place, do you know? And I know for a lot of people, as not ideal as it is and as sad it is, do you know, video games or, you know, something they love or something they're passionate about, you know, ends up being that distraction they need, or even, you know, a temporary, not obviously it's not the same thing, and it's not good enough in that regard, but sometimes, you know, a temporary surrogate, you know, kind of escape and kind of guidance, you know, that they find in their passions and talking with others about them. Because, you know, when you don't have that good attachment, you know, finding something you're passionate about and that you love and that you feel safe in and that you feel comfortable in, and it's, you know, something away from the hardships of the world that give you time to your thoughts and allow you to process. Because, you know, even when you're playing a game and, you know, from the outside in, you might see someone staring at a screen, you know, there's a lot going on in your head in those moments. You know, you might be having a distraction, you might be processing, you might be dealing with emotions that you just need to take a step back from before you start dealing with them again. We need those things in life, do you know? And I think, you know, if you think of a cuddly teddy you had growing up, I think, you know, you form an attachment to that you want to keep. And I think, you know, as adults and as video game collectors, and this kind of segues between the two of them, I think often we love our retro video games and we collect them as retro enthusiasts because to us, they're the same thing as a photo album. You know, to us, you know, you played maybe, I don't know, the first Fable, or you played a Zelda game, or you played a Mario game during a period of your childhood or adolescence that was very difficult, and it helped give you enough time to breathe. It allowed you to breathe. It allowed you to experience something. It allowed you to process. It allowed you to become more self-aware of what was happening around you. And then those games become very, very important to you, you know. And then we want to surround ourselves with them because they're almost like a shield and an armor to, you know, why they were so important to us, what they got us through. Do you know, in essence, they become like a friend, or they become like that teddy that, you know, you're holding on to at night, or a soother that you're looking for comfortable with. Obviously, again, you know, there's a balance between soothers, you know, talking about something like addiction, but that's not where I'm going for with this. And I think your relationship with video games changes as you grow, and video games have changed as we've grown. Do you know? They have become from something that was a little more leaned into something that was perceived as toys to, as I said, something that is an art form, and something, first of all, toys and play should also be able to be enjoyed by anyone. That's not something, we're taught out of that, I think, as kids. Do you know what I mean? It's very, very important for us to be able to be playful. Do you know? It's just so important. You learn so much in being playful. You learn so much in getting to pretend and, you know, being in these different environments from your normal day. Because people think it's a fantasy, but sure, there's fantasies, but we're also projecting onto those fantasies of who and what we could be. Who and what we could be, you know, how we can improve ourselves, right? You know, a kid dreams of being a superhero, you know, obviously knowing that it's, you know, that it's play and pretend, but also that we look at, you know, we look at our heroes growing up, real or fictional, that we want to take aspects of them and we want to become more like them. And, you know, if that makes us a better person in the process, you know, I'm all for that. So yeah, and, you know, our relationship changes with them as we grow. Like, I know kind of then when I got to that 17 age, I was kind of enjoying life so much, I took a break back from video games. I was meeting so many people because video games gave me these skills to go out there and be who I am. And then I got to exercise that and make friends and make mistakes and, you know, fall in love and fall out of love. And, you know, I think, you know, that period of life between that and kind of my early 20s and college and going out all the time, you know, there was a bit of I was still playing video games. I was still madly in love with them, but it was kind of became something that there was a lull in. And I think coming back to them, you know, again, you know, as I'm more settled as a person, you know, I feel like I've gone out there and I've done a lot of my mistakes, my learning, my growing as a person. And, you know, I can kind of come back again and re-relate to some of the old games I played, you know, understanding my growth, like, you know, a review process. You're playing Ocarina of Time again from being a kid to an adult, and you feel that emotion coming up again you felt as a kid. It's such a unique way to, you know, to get in touch with your feelings and emotions again. You know, you're rethreading this, pushing the narrative forward, art form, you know, from a different angle of your life, and it changes the meaning of stuff for you. It also allows you to reconnect with emotions that maybe have laid dormant, or maybe some more processing you need to do with those feelings, you know, which is incredible. So I think there is a direct relationship. And I think as well, you know, myself and Nisha, we were talking about in the previous episode, he was, you know, I think it's interesting, you know, talking about playing video games based on where you are mentally. Do you know, if your mental health isn't good during a period of time, I think we do often try and go back to the retro classics to try and gain comfort. The same way I would relate to, say, if you're non-gamer and you watch that episode of Friends for the 100th time, and you don't want to try something new because you need that comfort. You don't want to stay in that zone, but sometimes it can be healthy to be in it just to get a bit of comfort and to get on your feet again. There's a reason re-watch things over and over again. It's a comfortability, it's safety. There's no change there. There's no possibility of shocking us with something. I think as well, there is a huge aspect again within the collecting. You kind of build a room around it. There'll be a lot of collectors maybe potentially listening here, and kind of understanding the aspects of, when you look at your collection, what does it mean to you? Can you sell it? That they're interesting questions in of themselves. Like, you had the experience. Do you need to hold on to the game? What is it? What is it within it? Again, if you're someone who's a non-gamer, do you still hold on to that teddy you had as a kid? Do you have it put away somewhere? Can you let it go? What is your attachment to these things? Which I think is a really interesting question. And when you understand your attachment to it, is it a yearning? Is it a yearning for what you had? Is it a security blanket? Is it a connection to a person who's no longer with you or alive? Like in a lot of cases, I have many memories of growing up, and a lot of people in my life have passed away for different circumstances and whatnot, and some of them are correlated with them. Do you know what I mean? Some of them are memories of them, and this is what I mean. They're like photo albums as well in their own case. So I really trying to urge people to understand that maybe even if you don't understand video games, that it's always great for us to have empathy and understanding what maybe something means to someone else. Do you know what I mean? Putting yourself in someone else's shoes. So, if someone's sharing a passion with you and they're really excited about it, understand what you're excited about in life and maybe try and be excited for that too, because you never know how important something is to someone. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's really, really cool that people have that, because I know a lot of people don't either. And, finding something you love can be difficult as well, particularly if, depending on your lifestyle, how busy things are, how much luxuries you have, how much you don't, whether you have to work 2 jobs, I know there's a huge variety of things that impact that, and it's not a one-size-fits-all model, but I just think as an art form, as a passion, as a hobby, as a tool of self-discovery, as a tool of projection, as a tool of understanding ourselves and our wants and our needs through different characters and controlling those characters physically, or games where they allow you to create your own characters completely, and you get to be either something very similar to yourself or something very different. Because if we create a character that's nothing like us, it still comes from us and there's still something to discover there. Do at the end of the day, everything is a part of us. Even if we make it up as a character that's nothing like us, it still comes from us. So there's so much discovery to be had there. I think, so I was talking about as well, like how our own mental health often dictates our ability to connect with the game. And I think many people may have experienced that. You'll probably find the same again with a book or a movie. You sit down one time to try and watch something and you're like, I can't get into this. And then maybe, at a different period of your life, you're like, this is the best thing I've ever watched. I can't believe I couldn't get into this the first time. Stuff like that, and how we interact with art forms, I think is another very interesting self-reflective tool of what was going on in our lives. And obviously our tastes and our palates change. That's also great, because it means you're evolving as a person all the time. I think it's really interesting when we love something 10 years ago. Now, I'm not saying from a kid, because obviously from a kid, but let's say you're 20 and you love the movie, and you're 30, you don't like it anymore. There can be a lot of reasons for that. If it's a comedy, the great thing about comedies and our own psychology is the idea of the unexpected is very funny to us. And obviously, as we grow, we learn more. And, a sad thing that can be true in essence is, we don't often laugh as hard as we did as kids. Not always, but not as often, because the more of life we experience, the less shock it gives us, But when you're a kid, if something happens, you're like, this is the most unexpected thing that's ever happened to me in my 8 years of being alive. So, there can be a lot of like intrinsically novelty, first time feelings of shock and comedy and horror that stick with you, they're hard to recreate in later life, and can be often the same with video games too. But yeah, so I think where you are in life is often a nice reflective tool of seeing how things affect you as well. There are a couple of games as well that I wanted to kind of lay mention to that I think have been important to me. And there's some as well that are just games that are very excellent at representing, mental health. There's games that really depict mental illness in a way that I couldn't imagine any art form being able to do. That again allow us to sympathize and empathize with people, understand people. I mean, you look like a game like Hellblade, which the developers did such great research into, hearing voices, different types of psychosis, different mental illnesses, really getting to talk to people who experience these issues and wanted to lovingly create an experience for people where they could understand what that felt like. You're understanding something, with a 3D audio space, hearing voices that doubt you, hearing, hearing voices is an interesting topic in itself because, there's kind of a weird stigma around it. We obviously, for a lot of people, I know not everyone has an inner monologue, but for a lot of us we do, and that is a conscious and a voice we listen to from time to time as well. So it's but this game does a great job of a 3D environment space of putting you, in an anxiety state even, but you're experiencing this in a safe environment at the same time. So an experience of Senua in Hellblade, going through her journey of trying to bring her loved one, her remains of a loved one, to this, peak of a mountain, just in a very basic story, because, in her belief system, this person needs to be brought here for their soul to be kind of vindicated, I believe, was kind of the main story of it. But, her own mental health struggles along the way and her own mental illnesses that she's experiencing to get there. And the metaphor of, reaching the top of this mountain, and there's a huge metaphor in our lives of going through dark times and trying to reach the top of a mountain, trying to get past the clouds, and learning that, really instilling different lessons, like, no matter who you are, what you experienced, there's always the hope that there's always hope, first of all, but there's always the idea that, things are always moving, things are always changing, and it's like put one foot in front of the other, and things can and always will be better. And I think, a game like that alone, or you think of, there's just so many games I think that can instill hope for people, that in their darkest time when they need that escape and they play it, they can not just have a distraction, they not have time just to process their feelings and emotions, but they come out finishing an adventure that they took part in, that they got through, that they brought the character through, and that they created understanding, and they're actually creating hope. And as the great Uncle Ira said in Avatar The Last Airbender, which is one of the most beautiful cartoons of all time, is he says, hope is something we give ourselves in the darkest of times, and if video games can help us along in that way with meeting people and experiencing stories, it's great too. A couple of other games that I think are great if you're kind of looking for, a mental health avenue. Gris or Grease, I never know how to pronounce it. It's a beautiful 2D side-scrolling puzzle platformer. It's a short game, so it can be really, really lovely. It deals very abstractly with the idea of grief, the different stages of grief, and it just, without words, without directly telling you anything, so indirectly, so abstractly. Sometimes my favorite work to do as a therapist and as a client when I was in art therapy is to work abstractly, because you tend to connect more on a feeling basis. Sometimes you want to rid yourself of our learned language of how we describe emotions, and you just want to feel. I as a therapist love working with feelings first, someone comes to me and they're like, I feel so incredibly angry, or I feel so incredibly hurt. I'm like, where do you feel the hurt in your body? And someone says their stomach, or if they say their chest or their shoulders or wherever it is, I'm like, stay with that feeling just for a minute, as uncomfortable and as hard as it is, let's just stay with that and describe it as best you can. And then we might, go to do you remember the first time you had that feeling on your body? And someone might relate to it. Oh yeah, when I was X years old, I used to get this all the time. And then you're able to work in dialogue with the emotion. You're able to trace it back to where it comes from. And then through art as well, you're able to depict it in more detail, because in reality we're feeling creatures above all. We really, really are. Language is something we learn to communicate and express, and language is very, very important. But too often we use language as a deflecting mechanism, right? So when you have these games that are giving you just this visual and audio beauty that you're controlling, and your hands, you're going in a flow state, you're working through it, and all of a sudden you're feeling emotions. It's the same way listening to music. activates different parts of your brain. And to think that vibrations, which is what music is, can make you cry. What is in your body that's reacting to a sound that's making you cry? What is in art? What is in feeling? What is created by another human that has no words, that has no visuals, that has nothing, that is reverberating within you, your heart and your soul, that leaves you crying? Do you know? And video games are similar in that way too. You always got to remember that they're created from people with the love, passion, sweat and tears, and they can be abstractly put into something that can make us feel something as well. I think games that would have had just like probably the most emotional impact, and people would be sick of me mentioning them, but The Last of Us 1 and 2, like they're games, particularly part 2, that I think is one of the few games. And you got to remember as well, right? Like, you're pushing the narrative forward. Imagine a scenario where, I mean, you know, you're playing the first game, you wait 6-7 years for the second one to come out. So you're on this mental journey with these characters for nearly upwards of, 8 years. And, you get to different points and, there's finalities. You've grown up with things. Do you know what I mean? I remember it was one of the few experiences I've never had it like it, where I was shook. I was physically shook. I think I was a little bit traumatized by different events that happened in that game. And I remember just being like so amazed that I could be so affected by something like that was fictional. Like, just so incredibly amazed. So amazed about my reaction and the learning that offered me. How and why I was reacting the way I was reacting, So incredible that, that gives you the, developing your emotional intelligence by feeling, because that's what you're doing. When you're feeling these emotions that you don't get to regularly feel in day-to-day life in a safe environment. Now, obviously, for some people, it is a day-to-day life and it can be super, super difficult and unfortunate. But in this circumstance, you're feeling emotions you don't always get to feel. And, that's developing your emotional intelligence. That's developing your understanding with that feeling. That's developing your ability to process that feeling if it comes up in your life again. And I just couldn't stress the importance of that, Like, the more you feel something that you don't often get to feel, the more you're learning about that, the more you're adapting to it, the more you understand it, the more you know where it comes from, and the more that you know if you come up to a difficult point in your life again where you feel that sadness, grief, anger, you can identify it more, you can react to it more healthily, positively. And what an amazing tool that is, I think. There's other games. I think like BioShock is a very interesting twist of a game that deals with the idea of control, I guess. Life is Strange are these narrative story-driven games that deals with kind of teenage angst is the best way to describe them, but I think they do a great job with an extra fantasy twist involved with them that I think are good. At least the first two games, I think. Silent Hill, just like a game I played recently that let me experience this melancholy dread is the best way to describe it, in a haze of mental illness. Silent Hill 2 and 3 I got to play. I did play them on stream, which definitely helped me get through those games. Again, my main job at the moment is I'm a streamer, so I entertain, I play video games, I show the ones I'm in love with, I share them with the community, we talk about them, we build friendships, and sharing them with others is such an amazing passion, sharing some of my old, sharing my old, in inverted comma, my teddy bears I grew up with, playing Mario 64, The Legend of Zelda, Wind Waker, which meant so much to me. And has such an emotional impact on me that just the soundtrack makes me emotional, because it was just in such a blissful, happy period of my life that I got to play them, that they have such strong memories and connotations with them. So yeah, I think, to kind of put a wrap on, obviously, I'm trying to express my passion. I'm trying to express how, from a mental health point of view, I think the importance of video games and how the importance of play and, allowing yourself to get to know yourself, and then externally through meeting people and your passions is just so incredibly important. I think games are just not just a form of an escape, but like a provocative tool to help us process our own struggles that often act in like parallels to the struggles we face in games. Quite often they can mirror what's going on in our life. And I think we connect and relate with the narrative of a game, learn decision-making skills, connect deeply with the art of characters, music, narrative, acting, all while playing a primary role in connecting them all together. Without you, the game doesn't exist, quite literally. And they can be nostalgic. They're like a living and breathing link to our past, in times of uncertainty. And I think they can be new or captivating adventures that offer us company enough to see the hope for the future. So thank you for listening to my solo podcast. And I hope you have a very, very, very nice day. And Nisha, I miss you. Lots of love, guys. Bye, 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 bye.